Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to work with you all as we kind of navigate this whole contract. So a little bit of background about me. I've spent about 15 years in the nonprofit space. I started as an auditor. I'm a CPA by training. I audited many organizations, including some that are on the call today. So that's kind of how I started my career in familiarizing myself with some of these more complex contracts with the county. After that, about 7 years of that, I spent 4 years as a CFO of what is now called Family Forward. Before they merged, I was on the Children's Home Society side. So I spent a lot of time staying in compliance with these contracts. And then about 4.5 years ago, I started my own accounting firm, specializing in working with exclusively nonprofit organizations, although we work with several early education providers here in town. And, I was invited by Deanna in partnership with United for Children to assist on the budget component and the technical assistance and share some of my tips, tricks, hacks that I've learned over the last 15 years to stay focused on what we're trying to do and not let a misstep on the administrative side overshadow the work that we're trying to do, right? So getting in trouble with either the funders or the auditors or any other component of there. So I'm excited to kind of walk through the budget. I've actually submitted a budget, or an application already in collaboration with one of the partners here. So I've been actually able to see the budget. And for those of you, I keep saying budget because that's the topic of this call, but I've seen the application. I created kind of a dummy profile, and I can kind of walk you all through what I'm looking at when I refer to separate sections. So I went ahead and taken the liberty to go through and kind of assess what are the different sections and, what can we do to help support you all that maybe don't have experience, especially our for-profit counterparts that don't have any experience applying for these sort of contracts. So I wanted to walk through that and especially lend some assistance on the budget side and some of the ideas that I've walked through as I've helped some of the community partners already get this application in.
Tasha?
So with that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just want to also make really clear, because we have folks that join us outside of St. Louis County. We have Illinois child care providers and home family providers all over the place. And even though that this, the St. Louis County CARES Act Child Care Relief Fund is specifically for St. Louis County child care providers, the information that Tasha is going to help give us today will help anyone that is applying for funding, grants, loans, all of that.
Yeah, great. That's a great point, Deanna. So many of you probably already know, but I think it's worth for anybody that watches. We're recording this presentation so folks will be able to access it later. The CARES money is trickled down from federal dollars, right? And St. Louis County has just been a little bit ahead of the city in distributing these funds. So the process for which the county took could look relatively different, and they might have a slightly different approach. But I think, to your point, Deanna, a lot of the comments that we'll kind of walk through would be valuable. And our hope is that once the city funding comes through, we would be able to tweak our, I'm going to certainly be working with some of the city providers on that process, and I'd be able to lend some of my tips, tricks, and hacks specific to that application, because in the spirit of government funding, the applications will likely be different. So you won't be able to take it word for word, but we'll navigate that process when we get there. And so with that said, I thought I could go ahead and share my screen. I put together a couple tools for us and then just a kind of a high level presentation to help me keep my thoughts together. And I have 3 different screens going on here. So if I'm not looking directly at you, don't fear. So with that, if it's okay, for the sake of time, should I go ahead and get started? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So you'll see my name circulating with a lot of these budget technical assistants, and just somebody wave or let me know if you can't see my screen. Like I said, I'm on multiple monitors here, and also in collaboration with United for Children. And we'll have some other partners that will likely be assisting us in some of these technical calls too. So those are some of the players. Like I said, for those that have missed the call and need to share my information or need assistance later on, here's my contact information and a quick bio on me, but we've already covered that ground. So let's just dive right into it. A couple things that I wanted to review, and I know this isn't technically the accounting side, but I know we're kind of creating this more of a topic-based technical assistant. So I wanted to highlight a couple things that I think is worthy of repeating in every presentation. But just so some of you that may not be super familiar with this process, you haven't had the time to go ahead and review some of the eligibility requirements, I thought we could go ahead and go through those now. And I am not a licensing expert. I am not a program expert. So some other people might be able to chime in on some of those questions. But I did kind of take this from the application and paraphrase it in certain ways. So if you have specific questions, I'll do my best to answer. But on some of those pieces, I may not have all the specific answers. But number one, you have to be located within the county. Again, as Deanna had mentioned, they will have city funds become available. I've talked with some of our city providers, and we believe those funds are going to become available and allocated in July or very soon. So we'll stay tuned with that. We have to be adhering to all of the guidelines that we've been getting for COVID-19, that we require background checks and have non-discrimination policies with our current and prospective employees and volunteers. So make sure you have your I's dotted and T's crossed there. And then that we're not going to quote unquote double dip, and I'm going to explain that a little bit later, with PPP or the Paycheck Protection Program. This is also through the CARES Act. So they want to make sure we're not double dipping with that. And I'll go over that a little bit more. And other funds, right? So SBA has some different program opportunities. There's all different sorts of pots of money for this COVID disaster relief. And they just want to make sure you're not double dipping the funds. And I'll talk to you about how to get through that. And then you have to be in good standing with the state of Missouri. For any of you that aren't completely sure what that means, you have to do generally an annual registration with the Secretary of State. You go to their website, and the form that you're looking for, the certificate that you're looking for is a certificate of corporate good standing. I don't know, it's something like $11. You go on the website, you enter your information, you pay the $11 and they can spit it out. You can download it right then and there. So don't delay on that too much because if you have any issues troubleshooting to get a profile set up with the Secretary of State, that will be something that you're going to be looking for. I'm not going to go over too much of that because it's not really accounting related, but just know those are the main things that, you know, we want to keep track. Next thing, again, just re-emphasizing this, applications must be submitted through the online portal. I can't even find a paper version of this application. You must submit it through the portal. That's not uncommon for the county. So if you're looking for a paper copy of the application, either I couldn't find it and overlooked it, or it doesn't exist. Either of those options are solid, but everything that we're looking at, the submission has to be done through the portal, and that's what I expect. And the deadline is July 14th, 2020 at 5 p.m. Central Time. So it's a little bit different where we had the paper applications, we could send it in the envelope, we can hope that it's postmarked. In many cases, they will lock you out of that system and you can't submit. So I strongly encourage you to even submit it a day or two in advance because their systems have crashed because everybody's trying to submit it at 5 p.m. on the due date. So try not to be in that camp, and you can submit them today. In fact, like I said earlier, I've already had some early education providers that have submitted the application to the county. So I want to go over another thing, like what are we talking about here? How much money can the organization get in kind of simple terms? There's essentially two separate sources of two eligible areas to spend, and it's called business interruption and reopening costs. So business interruption, we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. That's where you're going to see this business interruption component. And it's a little confusing the way they have it here, but $1,000 a month for 3 months, $3,000, right? Same here. And it's based on your child capacity size. So whatever your child capacity is, you're going to base it on here. So maybe you're a home-based provider and you take up to 10 kids, you can get $1,000 a month for business interruption, or $3,000 total. And you can also get this public health component. Let's just, in our minds, think of what does it take for us to reopen? Additional cleaning supplies, plexiglass, you know, any other sort of equipment that we're having to use to kind of modify our drop off and pick up or anything like that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So those are the two different funds of money. So what we're talking about here for smaller providers, we're talking a total payment of $3,450. All the way up to $24,000, right? And that's to be spent over the next 3 months. Okay, so those are kind of housekeeping items, get everybody on the same ground level there. PPE as well, Katie, yes, you can use it for that. So I want to go over the program table budget. And before I do that, I just want to show you what I'm referring to. I say tab 4. Let me go ahead and pull up our county website. Make sure I have my dummy one up here. Okay, so hopefully you all can see this. I'm trying to fit a lot on the screen, but you're going to see these different tabs when you log in. You're going to see this. This is, I'm just calling it tab 1. And every time I've logged in, they're in the same order. So hopefully that stays. But the general information, this is basically general questions about your organization. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And then you have this program budget table. Okay, this is tab 4 that I'm referring to. So when you log in, and that's a little bit of a process too, you've got to do some setup. So don't delay on getting your portal set up. There's some instructions in the handout for that that we can offer if you all don't know how to log in here and get this set up. So anyway, so we're talking about the budget table. So it's going to look like this when you click on it. Okay, it's fairly straightforward, and I'm going to tell you my hacks for making this as simple as possible. So there are 2 different sections, as I mentioned, 2 different pots of money there. Okay, so we're going to move that over for a minute. Okay, so a little bit of information here. Basically, let's assume in this particular example, it's one of our larger providers, right? They have over 100 kids that they have capacity for. And here's how I structured it. Some of the things that we know specifically in the application, it says you cannot get this money and use it for expenses that are already covered by other sources. So again, that's kind of where it goes with the PPP. It specifically spells out the PPP, but I want to really clarify, it's okay if you have PPP funds, payroll protection program. Sometimes people hear PPE, the equipment, that's not the same thing, but the PPP loan, it's okay if you've got those funds. It's okay if you've gotten other sources of emergency funding, as long as you're not using it for the same thing. You can't say, well, I've got to buy a plexiglass and charge it to 3 different people. That's what they're saying. It's not allowed. You can't take a donation from people and then use these proceeds to reimburse them, right? So if a donor, spent $500 on supplies, you can't give this back to the donor. You can't pay severance. So if you're letting people go involuntarily, you can't use it for severance pay. You can't do any legal settlements, no insurance claims. If you had damage to your building and you submitted a claim to the insurance company, you can't then go and say, hey, I'm going to use these funds to fix that small kitchen fire I had earlier, even though you got an insurance claim to cover it. So again, kind of the double dipping. It's really interesting, some of the examples they used. But if you owe back taxes or any taxes, you can't use those funds for this. Or any capital improvements. Don't go, build out your library or finish a classroom. Don't do anything that's not just truly core of what you do. Keep it simple. What I do, here's a little hack with grants. A lot of people think they want to add all these different line items because it's going to be like a really good ask. I like to keep it simple. Salaries and wages. This is true salaries. I'm not talking about taxes. I'm not talking about benefits. I'm not talking about any of those things. So this is $21,000 for 3 months for a provider that likely is maybe even doing over $1 million a year of revenue. Okay. So payroll is probably $600,000. We will absolutely, under any circumstance, spend $21,000 in salaries and wages. There's really no reason to complicate this anymore than just say we're going to pay employees that have been furloughed or at risk of being furloughed because we've lost tuition payments or anything else. So keep it super simple and just kind of run through the math. And I would imagine that most of us, even if we got PPP funds, we will spend all of that money and this money between now and the end of the year. I'm not worried about that at all, probably for any scenario. And if you think you're at risk, shoot me an email and I could talk with you briefly about it. But I believe that any person that I've worked with will by all means spend this money. So now again, this is the largest type of school. So this is going to be the $21,000. For some of the smaller providers, it could be about $3,400. So as long as you're going to spend $3,400 through the end of, it says for 3 months, but the final report is due in December. And Dan, I don't think I saw specific guidance on you have to use it in these 3 months. we do have to give monthly reports and a final report by January. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So again, keep it simple, salaries and wages. If you think that doesn't make sense for you for some reason, reach out to me and we can talk about that. So this is the one component, kind of going back here. This is this top part here. So you just put in salaries and wages. There we go, 21,000. And that's all you got to do for that. Let's talk about the next set of money. That's for the PPE, like Katie Ron just asked for. It specifically says you should use this money, the reopening cost for PPE, modifications to workspaces. So that's the plexiglass example I gave, cleaning supplies, any sort of screening equipment, thermometers, anything like that. So you only get, and going back here, the maximum you can get is $450, you know, $900, you know, whatever these amounts are. It's not, we're not talking huge dollars here. So I'm inclined to just say supplies, cleaning supplies, PPE. We'll spend, you know, $3,000. Oh, it says right here. I told you, I don't know where it says. You have from March 1st to December 30th to spend $3,000 on supplies for my larger providers. Not going to be a problem at all. We know that. I mean, we're talking about spending thousands and thousands of dollars on cleaning supplies or PPE from now until the end of the year. So just keep it easy and simple, supplies. That's all you have to put in here. So then you go back into the county. What'd I do with that? Where'd that go? You go back into that application down here and just say, because see, it says supplies, specifically that line item is PPE and cleaning supplies. I mean, no problem. So I just put in, you know, $3,000. That's it. And then it asks you to describe anything other. We've kept it simple. We haven't classified anything as other, so we're just going to leave that blank. Okay. And that's really all we have to do. And then we put in the $24,000 there. That's it. That's it for the program budget. If we keep it super simple, we don't need to provide any sort of allocations or anything else weird. So that's fairly simple. Okay. Where it gets a little bit more complicated, I think for some of you all, is this recent fiscal year budget. If you are not a nonprofit and you've never really had to do this before, this is going to be something completely foreign. So a couple tips that I think about when I do probably more grant writing than I ever thought I would as an accountant, in the sense of budgets. But for one, know your audience.
Hi.
We're asking for,
Okay.
there we go. I don't know if I can mute that person. Okay, so know your audience. If we're trying to state a case that we've lost money, make sure you look at your budget, that your expenses outweigh your revenues. Is there a way to hide?
Okay.
Is there a way to mute?
Hi, Tamika.
Thank
can
you.
Mute your phone.
Are you too?
It doesn't let me mute anybody, but.
Hi, Tamika. Can you mute your phone? Or Becky, you can mute her as well.
Yeah. Okay. So again, know your audience. If you're trying to make a case for the fact that we need money to cover losses, then make sure when you put your budget together, you're not showing this huge net income that just asks for a lot of questions. In other words, if your revenues are exceeding your expenses, let's have a conversation about that and make sure that we reflect it in the appropriate way, because the county might say, why do you need our money if you're going to make money? And then it just starts unraveling all the different questions. So just kind of know your audience. And this is applicable for any contract or grant. Keeping it super simple, like I said, if we know we can spend those funds on one line item, just stick with one line item. And that's an incredible ask because it's salaries and wages. We're trying to preserve jobs. We're trying to keep our teaching staff intact. I don't think anybody can really argue with that. If you don't have an accounting system, so all of my clients have an accounting system. We use QuickBooks Online for almost everybody. If you don't have that already, that's okay. I'm going to walk you through examples for how you can get some numbers, even if you don't have an accounting system. Use your tax returns. If you don't have tax returns, then we start looking at payroll reports and invoices or monies that we've received from either tuition or the state subsidy or Head Start, early Head Start, or something like that. And then, of course, we're going to come up with that information, and then we're going to incorporate any new changes. So if we know that our last year numbers were X and a few things have changed, we open up another classroom, we've hired another teacher, or we've lost some kids or what have you, we want to incorporate that into our into our considerations here. So, oh, sorry, I should make this bigger. So here's what I did. Let's just talk about the nonprofit budget. This is if you don't have an accounting system. If you have an accounting system, you should be able to run like a report. Hopefully you have a budget if you're a nonprofit. If you don't, call me. If you don't have a budget, run your profit and loss statement in QuickBooks for last year. Ask your accountant to get it for you, or you should be able to run, it's called a profit and loss statement in your QuickBooks file. So for those of, I'm kind of going with kind of more complicated scenarios where we don't have an accounting system. You just have a bank account, you have checks, you cut, you deposit and you subtract from your checking account. Okay. So if you are a nonprofit and you don't have these expenses in an accounting system, you can't readily find them, go and find your last tax return. If you can't find your last tax return, call your accountant. If you didn't have an accountant, do it. There is a website on the IRS. I don't know if you've all ever seen this before. Let me pull it up and I'll pull it over. Give me 1 second here. As you all know, your tax returns are publicly available, and on the IRS website, here we go. Where did that go? Here we are. Here's an IRS website. You can actually look up every single, nonprofit, and you can pull up your tax returns generally. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be the most recent one. Okay, well that's a bad example because they've had their status revoked. So don't be like them. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, no, the same one. Okay, let's try some of these that have not been revoked. Okay, bad examples here. Let's see, all these are revoked. Okay, let's look for, let's just look for like big brothers, big sisters or something. There's numerous locations of those. Okay, here we go. So you can actually pull copies of your returns. So you can actually see your last available tax return. You can click on that and download the tax return. Now, it may not be your latest version. So you see this goes back all the way to 2018. We don't have 2019 listed yet because that's not actually due, but at least it'll give you something to start with. So if you don't have copies of it, maybe you're new to your role or whatever the situation might be, you can hunt it down through publicly available sources. Okay, so there's this document on here. It's page 10 of your tax return, and it's called a Statement of Functional Expenses. It's not super clear, but at least you have final numbers for the last fiscal year. Take these numbers. For example, you need salaries and benefits. You can actually go to the section here where it says, it says compensation, benefits, payroll taxes, any of those categories, and you can dump right here into salaries and benefits. Contract services like professional fees, and you could populate there. Occupancy, you actually have an occupancy line item right here on your tax return. You could populate that number there. Plus or minus, if there's been any significant changes, you could certainly use that. Otherwise, round up or just make it, representative of who you are this year. But this is a source document you can use if you're really starting from scratch.
Tasha, it looked like Jennifer had a question. She was raising her hand. Sorry.
Thank you for reminding me because I have way too many things going on. Can you live in Illinois to apply for a grant? Your center has to be based in, is that the right person? Has to be based in St. Louis County. So I don't know if you live in there, but you operate out of St. Louis County, but you can't, that's a really great question, honestly, that we might need to go back to the county and confirm that. But if you lived in Illinois and you operated out of St. Louis County, presumably you pay taxes if you're a for-profit. So hopefully they would allow you to do that. But that's a good question.
Again, just a reminder that this is specifically for the St. Louis County CARES Act Child Care Relief Fund. That's specifically for St. Louis County providers, but the city is going to have something that we're hoping is going to be similar, so we don't have to learn new things. Mm-hmm. And also there are other funding opportunities that this will be beneficial to you as well.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of expenses in a nutshell. You can take these expenses, total expenses on this column, and populate it in here. And for those of you that haven't seen this before, for all of our nonprofit friends, this looks extraordinarily familiar. The county did not give any specific template that they require for the budget. So I just stuck with a budget template that everybody knows and has seen. It's the Missouri Common Grant budget template. You can download it online, but I've also kind of customized, I've customized it a little bit specific to kind of our population, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. I've made a template that you all can use and populate. Okay, so for-profit, it might be a little bit blurry, but bear with me. If you're a for-profit entity, likely, hopefully, you have filed what they call a Schedule C. It's on your tax return. So you generate business from your in-home daycare, or even if you have a for-profit entity, if they are either like a sole proprietor or an S Corp or something like that, you likely have a Schedule C. If you have something different than that, reach out and let me know. But they also require you to break down your revenues and expenses, very similar to a nonprofit. So you would take this off of your Schedule C. Ask your accountant if you have a tax preparer that has listed for business expenses, but you can see they have something very similar. They have, different benefits, they have wages and compensation, they have very similar line items. So this is, again, a good starting place for you if you're a for-profit. And as you would expect, very similar for the revenue side. So again, I put this template together and you all can download it. I'll give you a link for that here in a little bit. But this is also off of your 990 tax return. This is my nonprofit friends. So you can get this information and populate it here into the categories for your last tax return. The for-profit, this is that Schedule C I was talking about on your 1040. You should have your revenues broken down here, and you should be able to input total revenue into the appropriate cells here based off your last tax return. And if you have none of those things, let's chat, because we can work with you to try to put some numbers together. Because generally my approach for those situations, I'm going to think through my mind, if I know I get deposits of $10,000 a month in my bank account, and it's all from state subsidy or tuition or whatever, then that's going to be my revenue. 10,000 times 12 months, that's $120,000 a year. Expenses, maybe I have payroll, maybe I don't, but I can kind of go through my bank account, my bank statement, and look at what are my expenses. Probably the same expenses every single month. All my providers are similar in that way. Just come up with what you charge per month, multiply it by 12, and put those into the categories for the expenses. So before I dive into some more important things, I kind of have this saying, especially in the world of compliance and contracts and grants, which is very, that's what we live and die off of in the nonprofit space. Like I like to joke with people, the more money you get, the more problems you create for yourself. So I want you to know exactly what you're signing up for when you get these funds. It's not that scary, but I want you to know that. Before I dive into that though, I did want to go over this little Excel spreadsheet that I created. So this is that Missouri Common Grant that I talked about, that I modified it a little bit for specific to schools. And then I also did a for-profit tab. So you'll see 3 different tabs on this document, and you could just populate it here, your revenue, your expenses and your revenues. And again, we want to make sure our expenses, we want to make sure that it's reasonable. We want to make sure that in good faith, this is a good budget, but we don't want to go showing this as, on accident, because we did a keen error, as $1 million and we have, $90,000 of expenses or something like that. We don't want to send that off. It's going to ask a bunch of questions and possibly kick back your application. For-profit side, I did something very similar. You'll notice here that I don't include, although I do have fundraising events, but I don't include individual donations, corporate donations, assuming you don't get any of those. And more on the compliance piece, we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but I created this like really quick and easy Excel spreadsheet, and you're going to have a detail of the transactions for anybody that has an accountant or an accounting system. You should be able to do this within your system, but if you don't have that capability, just go ahead and you can type it into here if you want to. I would encourage you to, and we'll explain a little bit more about the compliance parts here in a little bit. But basically, as I suggested earlier, just go in for salaries and wages, populate that information right here. Every payroll report, you can go by employee name, or you can just say like, 7/1/2020. And if you have, 50 employees, you don't need to list them all out separately. July 1st, payroll, it was, $21,000. I mean, it could have been more than that, right? If you're a large provider. And then here on the purchases for supplies, they want to know, I literally took this information. It's a little small, so I'll blow it up. They specifically spelled out in their grant application that they require you to keep information for 5 years that include this information. Now, this is probably housed in your accounting system if you have one. If you don't, this is a easy spreadsheet to track. These, I even put in here drop-down boxes so you don't trip yourself up, because we need to send, actually I'm going to stop a little bit here and I'm going to go into the compliance part. But I put together kind of bulletproof ways for us to make sure that we've categorized the expenses in the appropriate buckets that the county has allowed. Again, we want to be transparent, but we don't want to slip up and have keying errors or issues that's going to subject the county to start asking a bunch of questions and then we get in trouble for something. So let's say we bought from Centos or something, I don't know, making something up, and we bought some, cleaning supplies or something. So see, it's a drop down and every single one of these cells are drop downs, okay? And then you just enter the information. But when we send this report to the county, it's going to always fall, if you don't just type in here and you just use the drop down, you're always going to be giving them the information they want to see. And then also down here, this is just a little tracking to show you how much more of those funds we have. And you can select from the drop down, which total grant did you get? 3,000, 8,250, 15,000, et cetera. And the same over here for the supplies. We have a question here. If I purchase PPE in May, can I reimburse myself for those funds that take it out of the relief program money? They did say on their application, as long as the expenses were incurred starting in, I took this right off their website today, as long as they incur between March 1st through December 30th, to me, that implies you can go retroactive and kind of reimburse yourself for the cost of that equipment. So I would say yes on that. You're welcome. I would just make sure you keep the receipt. So let's go into the compliance. So I say all of these things through the lens that I used to be an auditor for many years. I used to audit many different government contracts. I've talked numerous times to audits. I help some of you all get through your audits. I'm always audited, okay? So I always keep that in my mind on how to keep us out of trouble. So I want to go over some of those components here so you know exactly what you need to have on your radar. Okay, so this also comes right off their website. These funds must be used on the items listed in the application. That's why I put those drop-down menu item there so you can select exactly what this applies to. Now, I would make sure that if you said you're going to only spend those monies on supplies, then don't put like building modifications in there, because that's not what you told them you were going to do. So just know that has to be spent in accordance with how you agreed. You cannot decide to gift this to another center. You have to use it within your own center. You must maintain receipts and records to back up expenses for 5 years. What I do, because I'm a little bit of a control freak in this sense, I like to digitize my receipts. So I take pictures of them. I save them on my computer, maybe save a paper copy, but the county wants you to save them for up to 5 years. So we will also have a monthly reporting of expenditures due by the 30th day of each calendar month. Now here's where I think it's a little bit interesting. So for example, I work with Southside and we don't close the books on the 30th, but I have to get the expenses to the county on the 30th. So I need to clarify with them if they're talking about, if we are in July, do I have to give you a list by July 30th? Or do I have to give you July's list by August 30th? So we need to clarify that with them. It was a little unclear with their instructions, but just know if you keep using my little Excel spreadsheet, or if your accountant is doing a lot of due diligence, then we should be able to produce these little 2 bullets here. They want a line item of the expenditures and they want that report every single month. And I would make sure, we submit every single month. And then they want a final report due by January 15th, 2021. I haven't seen a copy of that final report. It could be something similar to what I just showed you on the Excel spreadsheet that shows that you sent all of them. They might give additional guidance on what those final reports could look like. So just keep this in mind. 30th day of every month, you have to be sending something to the county. I don't know how that's going to be done yet in terms of submission, but just know that. And then you have a final report due January 15th, 2021. And then finally, the county has the right to come in and audit the funds if they choose to do that. Meaning if they want to, you submitted a report or you didn't submit a report, they could come in. Let's say we have, 30 different invoices listed here. Generally what they do, they say, okay, I want to look at 10 of these invoices. Show me the documentation, show me the receipt, show me the invoice, show me something to substantiate that. So some people ask me, Tasha, do I have to keep every receipt? Yes. When it's county money, yes. Tasha, do I have to, I use my debit card. Is that good enough? No, it is not good enough because your debit card does not show what you purchased at Amazon and the fact that it was PPE. So you would want to, in that particular instance, you would want to get a copy of your order details off of Amazon. If you have something else, like some other weird situation where, I don't know, you bought something from an individual or you bought it off Craigslist or you did something like that. I've had clients do that before with furniture. I would keep some sort of documentation like the ad or something to show this is what we got for it. Because sometimes if you find yourself in a situation where you can't get a receipt or an invoice, try to get something so that they can have something to look at when they come out to audit. So that is the compliance matters that you just need to kind of keep on your radar. And like I said, if you keep your receipts, you do the monthly reporting, you do the year-end reports, and you just keep track of all of this information, you should be able to, unless they come out with additional guidance, just send this spreadsheet I created directly to the county. And that should suffice. And not necessarily every single month. I would just keep a rolling tab and I would just keep adding more line items and more line items. So that is, in a nutshell, what we've put together. And I will say, Indiana maybe wasn't necessarily expecting me to do that, so I'll ask for forgiveness later if it's not appropriate. But I have tendencies to do that. Another thing that I've taken the liberty to put together is, they're going to ask you some questions on your application, and we're still kind of fine-tuning the language, but we are certainly going to make this available for you all. Deanna, I'm referring to the program application information I put together, if you're okay with me sharing that.
Oh, yes. Actually, I wanted to...
You want to talk about it?
Yeah, we're getting all this, anybody who joins this, and we have a few other technical assistance webinars and even a couple more workshops where Tasha and other grant experts from Gladiator Consulting, sorry, will help, give more specific advice. But I love that Tasha has created kind of a template of typical grant language and choices based on your scenario. And so absolutely you can share that, but we'll also be mailing and sharing this out to everyone as well.
Yeah. So we'll get this out to you all, but what I did is I literally went through the portal and I copied and pasted every single question, because my vision is to figure out a way, if we're all doing very similar work, let's not recreate the wheel every single time. Let's take standard language that applies for most, tweak it if you want to, as it relates specifically to your center. But I went through every single question on the application. And again, I mentioned there is not a paper form of the application. It's all embedded with the portal. So what I did is I kind of created my own document, for lack of a better word, so that at least you all can have something to look at. So I'm not going to go over all of these. I just wanted you to know that this is coming and we made this available. When I have like these bolds in here, you have to choose one of those. This is going to be a drop down within the portal. So this can kind of give you a guide to start populating it or thinking through those questions. A lot of the first tab is general information. What's your address? Who runs the place? Are you licensed? Are you not licensed? Where are you located, etc. That's pretty easy. Again, here is some boilerplate language that I just put in, because if we're applying for it, we should all be St. Louis County Child Care Centers. We serve ages birth to 6, updated if it's through 5 or 3 or whatever. We currently serve however many kids, okay? And then geographic focus, so tab 2, we're going to be going over, where do your kids reside? And then also, what is your capacity? So this is going to determine the money you're able to request. So make sure you pick the appropriate one. And then it's going to ask you, okay, based on this information, which funding level are you trying to apply for? So you just select one. Again, it's a little bit of a weird format because it's through a portal on their system, but it's fairly straightforward. So select whichever one on the business interruption that you want based on your size, the 10 and less, 11 to 50. Same here. This is that second pot of money I told you about. How many employees do you have? If you don't, hopefully you know. If not, look at a payroll report. It's going to ask for percentages here. So this might take a little bit of homework for you all to come up with a percentage of racial composition of your kiddos. And then also annual income if you're able to determine that. So that's generally pretty easy. Where I wanted to get to is tab 3. And again, this is what I drafted. We're going to be looking with Gladiators a little bit to fine tune any of this, but feel free to take this information and modify it as you feel necessary or appropriate for your particular organization. In some of these cases, this may not make complete sense because I was trying to create something that would be for profit or nonprofit. You might get Head Start, you might not get, so you have to update it a little bit. But here's a couple options for answering. And I went into detail here, like what are different sources, how are you going to be tracking your funds? You could choose to update that in any way. So anyway, all this information is coming. So if you haven't got started on the application, my hope for you all would be you would be able to essentially copy and paste these information into the portal and then update it as it makes sense at all for your organizations. But at least I gave you some area to get started. And then again, this is the business interruption. We already talked about that. And that's it. So I'm happy to stick around. I know I've taken up enough of your time already, but we can certainly make all of these templates available. That's the plan. And also we have recorded this, so we'll make this available hopefully for anybody to listen back if we can. And I don't know, Deanna, do you have anything else you'd like me to talk about? Or if there's any questions, if we can open it up for questions?
Yeah, we can. Oh, yeah. So is the SBR grant in conflict with this grant? SBR. That is the, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, guys. It's a long day. SBR is the business.
Small business, like SBA?
Business. Yes.
Like the EIDL funds? Yeah, so the EIDL, the way that I interpret this grant, as long as we're not double dipping and charging multiple funding sources the same expense, like the plexiglass expense example I used earlier, you can't say I need $1,000 for plexiglass and then you charge 3 different funders for it. So you can get any other funding. It's not going to preclude you from getting the county money. You just can't use it for the same purpose. Now, you can use it for payroll, right? So for example, I have a client that we used essentially all of our PPP funds already on payroll, okay? So that's already March through, or April through today, basically. We've spent all those money. Even though we got the money, we've spent it, believe me, okay? So then we got SBA money. Now, SBA money can be used for working capital, it can be used for all different sorts of things. But let's pretend that we got a little bit of money from the SBA, that this is different than the CARES Act. This is a different pot of money. We've already spent that money. We've got a little bit of money from Deaconess for PPP, or PPE rather. We got a little bit of money here, et cetera. Doesn't matter. As long as I could still use going forward from now until the end of the year, these funds to cover payroll or any other costs that make sense within the lines of this grant, the way that I interpret this. So it's fair game.
I'm such an airhead, and it's so late that she even spelled it out for me. Small business relief.
Oh,
didn't even see it.
well, there's so many grants out there.
Somebody else asked if they are a new center and they just opened in February 2020. Are they eligible for this?
I saw nothing that prevents people from opening. I would assume that you have to, it says for expenses that are incurred between March through December. So I think as long as you meet all of the other requirements, it doesn't say anything similar to the PPP. They say you have to be in business by like February or something. I didn't see any of that in the application. So to me, it's fair game. I would absolutely submit a proposal or an application. And nowhere does it even ask, when did you get incorporated? Anywhere. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, you start a child care center today, I guess, and apply. I don't know.
The other question is the SBR grant had a restriction about if they that no business may receive an SBR grant if the business has a director, officer, employee, agent, or subcontractor that is elected or appointed official of St. Louis County. An elected or appointed official of any, that's a restriction as well.
That is a restriction. I read that earlier. I'm going to add it right now because in my mind, I thought, oh, I should add that. And then for some reason I did not. But yes, that is a restriction I read earlier today. Yes.
So we're going to do this again next week, so if you have more questions between now, the good thing is that it's been extended to July 14th. So we have a little bit more time. Originally it was due June 30th. And honestly, guys, what I've heard is that not very many grants have been submitted. So there's $5.9 million that they're wanting to give. So tell your friends and neighbors in the county and child care providers that the application, it's always, I always feel intimidated by applications, all the technical detail. If I didn't have people to help me with that, it would be crazy. So you have help. Call us, we'll help you. We have a few sessions here. We have a couple of workshops where we can do some in-person if you want to. Tosha is going to be available via phone the last week that it's due. So there's help here. So we'll go ahead and stop the conversation here so that if anybody has any additional questions or if Anita, Becky need to close this out, we will, yes, please spread the word that this money's there, the application, they'll get help with the application. Just call us and we'll set you up. And we have more webinars to go through.
Deanna, in terms of the sharing the templates I put together so far today, I have a link for a folder, a Google Drive folder that I can drop that in, unless we have a better platform for sharing the budget template that I created, the PowerPoint download if somebody wanted to look at that or share that. And then, of course, the sample responses. I'm fine with sharing a link here, but I just didn't know if there was a better place we could share that so everybody can get those resources.
Go ahead and share it here, and then we'll make sure that we add it onto our website where it has all the links to that, the resources provided. And yeah, and we're also going to be emailing this information out to everyone too.
Great.
Cool.
Okay.
And printing. All of it.
Any other?
Anyone else? Yeah, I was going to ask if anyone else has any other questions related to the grant or just in general. Got just a couple more minutes left.
Sorry, it took a little bit longer this time, so we'll make sure that we leave some more time for some other general questions about your reopening plans and how things are going too.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Tasha. I appreciate your time and all the work with this. I know that there have been a lot of questions for that, and it definitely is helpful when you have other people to share some ideas with. So we do appreciate all your assistance with that. And like Deanna said, the next 2 weeks, the July 1st and the 8th, are also, so the next 2 meetings for the evening Zoom meetings are going to be having time to talk about these. But please reach out if you have any other questions as we go through. Anything else that people have been working on or questions about?
Just do you want to mention the upcoming trainings as well?
I'm not sure exactly when. I was gonna say, I know that we have, I was gonna say, Anita, you probably know more specifically. We do have one that actually just got approved today. So we're looking at doing it kind of the second or third week of July on strategies for working with children that have have exposure to traumas. So we know there's been a lot of questions or about that and conversations about that. So the approval did come through today, so that is almost finished up, and we just need to give time to get that onto the registration and onto the calendar. So look forward to that. Anita, I think there was something else that maybe Gina or Lisa was doing. Do you know more details?
Is doing one on diversity. I thought I had the date like right in front of me, but I don't. But we'll make sure you guys get that, or I can look it up as maybe we can finish up. But and then if there's any needed topics, I know we've been thinking about doing something specifically around the opening and closing times and how that's different now for people, but any comments or suggestions around upcoming pieces would be helpful. I know we're also concentrating on family pieces too now as well. So.
Everybody go get you some money. Fill out those applications.
Money, money,
Call
money,
us if
money.
you need any help.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
You
guys all have a
get
great
your wave
week.
parade.
I know.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank
Wave
you.
parade.
Thank you.
Oh, wave.
Oh, we're not done?
We're not done waving until the last person leaves.
Lisa's going to just sit here now and wave at us. Harrietta, did that answer your question? I know you had some questions going into that. Did you get your questions answered? I didn't want to call you out in front of everybody.
Well, the funny thing is, I was trying to find, I lost the Zoom on my